First Minister's questions, and question number 1 from Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I offer the best wishes of the season to you, to the Chamber and to the people at home for a very happy Christmas. Could I also ask the First Minister, on the 28th of June in 2016, the Scottish Government's delivery plan for Scottish education promised a new specialist programme to recruit high-quality graduates into priority teaching subjects. It was to be in place by the summer of this year. Can the First Minister say how many graduates it's recruited?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, Presiding Officer, can I also say to you, to the Chamber and to people right across Scotland a very Merry Christmas and best wishes for the new year. As Ruth Davidson is aware, this Government is taking a range of actions to encourage more teachers generally into the profession, and of course the most recent statistics show that over the last year there have been more than 500 additional teachers coming into teaching, but also to attract teachers into particular subjects. That's why just a matter of months ago the Deputy First Minister announced incentive schemes to attract teachers into STEM subjects, for example. So we will continue to take a range of actions, coupled with the governance reforms, coupled with the actions we are taking to increase transparency around the performance of our schools, to make sure that we are driving up standards and closing the attainment gap.
Ruth Davidson.
Presiding Officer, I specifically asked the First Minister about her flagship specialist graduate route into teaching, which she announced last June, and I asked her how many graduates it had recruited, and the answer, which I don't think we heard in there, was none. 0, because it hasn't even been set up yet. Here is the National Improvement Framework, which was published last week. This is Scottish Education's report card, and it clearly states, page 52, that the Government has missed the deadline for its specialist graduate recruitment programme. We're barely at tender stage. So this is a programme announced in 2016, due to be delivered by 2017, still not here as we head to 2018. Now, also promised for June of 2017 was a new standards framework to help improve the school inspections regime. Can the First Minister tell us, has that promise been met?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, in terms of teachers, as Ruth Davidson, I am sure, is aware, there are a range of new routes into the teaching profession that have been made available, and by the end of January 2018, it's expected that around 280 students will be studying on one of the 11 new routes into teaching. There has been a 7.5% increase in the overall number of student teachers this year. That builds on a 19% increase in 2016. As I said in my first answer, we also recently launched the £20,000 STEM bursaries for career changers to attract teachers into particular subjects. So that is the range of action we are taking. In terms of improvement in our education system, again, as Ruth Davidson is aware, through the National Improvement Framework, we are taking a range of actions to make sure that there is that focus on improvement in our education system. Inspections have a crucial part to play in that, but there is a wider range of action underpinning our ambitions in that area.
Ruth Davidson.
Presiding Officer, under the SNP, teacher numbers are down by 3,500 and her flagship programme hasn't been delivered. Only this First Minister could come to the Chamber and try and claim that as some sort of a success. But in that second bite of the recruitment cherry, she completely missed the question that I'd asked her, which was about a promised new standards framework for school inspections due to have been delivered by 2017. And the answer is it hasn't been delivered, and we don't know when it will be. So let's stick with some broken education promises. Everybody knows that good school leadership is crucial for a good education. Even the SNP acknowledge this, which is why they promised to publish a national action plan to get more teachers to take the step up from a classroom teacher to become a head teacher. All the more important as so many head teachers are nearing retirement. The action plan was supposed to be in place by, yes, June of 2017. First Minister, where is it?
Well, again, if Ruth Davidson took the time to look in detail at these things, she would know, for example, that this Government is funding the Headship Leadership Academy. That is working with Columba 1400, which is seeing large numbers of teachers and head teachers go through that programme. We've also, again, got a range of initiatives to support leadership in Scottish education. We also have the highest number of teachers working in our education system since 2011. There were an increased number of school inspections over the past year, and we will see that number increase even further over the year ahead. The reality here is this is a government taking a range of actions across all of these issues to improve standards in our schools. And of course, we are seeing the outcomes of that across a range of different areas, not least the increase in teacher numbers that I've now, I think, mentioned about 3 times in the course of this exchange, which I haven't even heard Ruth Davidson acknowledge even once.
Ruth Davidson.
Let's cut through the back and forth between you and me, and let's go and look at what the improvement framework says. Let's see what the scorecard says about that. When it comes to an action plan on head teachers, not only has the deadline been missed, the plan is not published, but the First Minister apparently can't tell us when it will be. So we have a scheme to get more graduates into teaching that's been delayed. We've got a drive to boost inspections, which we're still waiting on. And we've got a plan to get more teachers to become heads, which appears to have been shelved. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because if you go through, and we have, all 75 actions that the government promised for education last year, fully a third of the commitments have either been delayed, they've been diverted, or they've been ducked. So this week, we've had it confirmed again how tough things are out there, with some schools having to shorten the school day because they don't have enough staff. Now, famously, the First Minister started this year again insisting that education would be her #1 priority. At the end of the year, does she really think it looks that way?
First Minister.
Yes, I do. Because let me recap. Over the last year, we've seen more than 500 additional teachers go into education. That takes us to the highest level of teachers in our schools since 2011. As I said earlier on, through the 11 new routes into teaching, by the end of January, we'll have an additional 280 students in teaching because of that. We have the bursary scheme that I've mentioned to attract teachers into STEM subjects. We have the head teacher leadership programme that I have spoken about. So again, we are a government taking a range of actions to make sure that we are improving education and closing the attainment gap. And of course, remember, if we were to follow the advice of the Conservatives, particularly around budgetary matters, we would have to take out of the draft budget published last week £500 million, over and above the cuts already being imposed by the Chancellor. That would not only wipe out the planned increase for the health service, it would wipe out most of the pupil equity fund as well. That is the reality. We are taking the action, we are putting the investment into education, and that is what will deliver results.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Presiding Officer, can I wish you and members of this Parliament and the people who send us here a very Merry Christmas and a peaceful 2018. 1 week on from the publication of the government's draft budget, we now know that lifeline local services, local jobs, local wages are being hammered yet again by this SNP government. And we also know that under the Scottish National Party, our Scottish economy is forecast by the Scottish Fiscal Commission to be facing, and I quote, subdued and sluggish economic growth, slow productivity growth, slowing employment growth for the rest of this Parliament. So, First Minister, is the Scottish Fiscal Commission simply talking Scotland down?
First Minister.
Our budget, of course, it is based on the estimates and the forecasts of the Scottish Fiscal Commission. Interestingly, of course, The forecasts that the Scottish Fiscal Commission makes around growth are based on, amongst other things, two key factors. Firstly, Brexit, and of course issues Tories don't like it, and of course concerns about lack of population growth. Now, if Richard Leonard is concerned about these things, as he should be, as I am, it makes it all the more strange that he has appointed a Brexiteer as his Brexit spokesperson, when what he should be doing is getting behind this government to argue for continued single market membership. It also, I think, would make a lot of sense for Richard Leonard to back this government in calling for greater powers over immigration for this Parliament, so we can focus on growing the Scottish population and don't find ourselves at the mercy of the anti-immigration rhetoric and policy of the Conservative government. So there may actually be some common ground that we can develop here if Richard Leonard is prepared to have the courage of his convictions, or what at least I hope would be his convictions.
Richard Leonard.
Well, of course, the Scottish Fiscal Commission's prognosis for the Scottish economy is not just based on Brexit, it's based on oil and gas contraction, low productivity, demography and low private sector investment. Presiding officer, so no matter how many times ministers say that the fundamentals of our economy are strong, it's clear that they are not, that they are weak. Research and development, announced yesterday, has grown, but it's far too narrow, with just 10 businesses accounting for nearly 40% of all new business research and development. Our export base as well is far too narrow, with just 15 businesses accounting for 30% of all our international exports. We've witnessed rising levels of bankruptcy, falling levels of business investment, and the SNP's own key economic targets, raising Scotland's GDP growth to the UK level by this year, is not met, matching the GDP growth of small, independent EU countries by this year, not met.
Order, please.
So what will it take?
Listen, so Mr. Leonard, hold on 1 second. Would members please listen to Mr. Leonard's question and stop interrupting?
And so my question is to the First Minister and to the people on her benches: when are you going to snap out of your complacency?
First Minister.
Thought I'd see Richard Leonard beaming at all of the applause he's getting from his friends on the Tory benches. Do you know what? It is right. Richard Leonard is right on one thing. Scotland's growth rate is not yet matching that of other small independent countries. I wonder why that is. So if Richard Leonard wants to join me in supporting Scotland becoming a small, independent, successful country, then I will welcome his conversion. But let's get back to reality. Right now in Scotland, the unemployment rate is close to an all-time low. The employment rate is close to an all-time high. Richard Leonard mentioned business research and development. We've now seen that exceed £1 billion for the first time. Growth in business research and development is outstripping that across the rest of the UK. We've closed the productivity cap with the rest of the UK, but yes, now need to close it with our other European competitors as well. And that is why the budget that Derek Mackay outlined last week had so many initiatives in it to support economic growth, from the initiatives on business rates to make sure we're the most competitive part of the UK on business rates, to capitalise a new national investment bank, to increase even further investment in research and development. Now, if Richard Leonard doesn't think all of that goes far enough, then here's an invitation to him. Between now and the next stage of the budget, Richard Leonard and Labour should come forward and tell us what further investments they want us to make in the economy. That would be a novelty for the Scottish Labour Party.
Richard Leonard.
Well, you see, beyond all the rhetoric and oratory of the First Minister, it's the loss of real jobs in the real world. So if things are so good, try telling that to the workers of the Airdrie Savings Bank, of RBS, of Quick Fit Insurance, to the workers of Doosan Babcock, of Ethicon and Tannoy, who have lost their jobs this year. Try telling it as well to the workers at Amazon, who, it's been reported today, are being forced to make unrealistic targets this Christmas to try to avoid redundancy in the new year. First Minister, this is a company that you handed over millions of pounds of taxpayers' money to. So you should be laying down the rules, because what Scotland's economy needs is real and radical change. It needs a government with an industrial strategy to stimulate growth. And it needs as well a government that is prepared to stand up to big business. So will the First Minister once and for all accept that she is presiding over an economy which is not serving the people of Scotland, and that the people of Scotland demand real, radical and urgent change to her economic strategy?
First Minister.
It's kind of hard to know where to start with all of that. I mean, it is good to see Richard Leonard so enthusiastically enter into the spirit of pantomime season in that question. But let me just try and perhaps insert a few facts into the debate we're having. Firstly, the last Labour administration gave Amazon more money than this administration has done, fact one. Fact two, Richard Leonard has talked about RBS and Airdrie Savings Banks, important institutions, but has it really escaped Richard Leonard's notice that, just like regulation of employment and most of the macro powers over the economy, banking regulation is reserved to the United Kingdom Government? It is not a responsibility of the Scottish Government. Has it also escaped Richard Leonard's notice that the unemployment rate in Scotland right now is not just close to a record low, it's actually lower than it is in the rest of the UK? And Richard Leonard is shaking his head at that. That is actually a matter of basic fact that perhaps he might care to research before he next comes to this chamber. But, despite the limited powers that we have over matters related to the economy, this is a government that does always stand up for workers. Ask the workers at DL, for example, that wouldn't be in a job right now without the intervention of this government. Ask the workers at Ferguson's shipyards who wouldn't be in a job right now. Or ask the workers of BIFAB who would not be in a job this Christmas without the intervention. Because while Richard Leonard was having wee photo shoots outside BIFAB, I was actually making sure that we saved that company from administration and kept those workers in a job. So that is real action, to be compared with the empty rhetoric of Richard Leonard and the Scottish Labour Party.
Thank you. We have a number of constituency questions today. The first from Jackie Bailey.
The First Minister will be aware of the tragic fire at Cameron House Hotel earlier this week. I'm sure she'll join with me in sending condolences to the families that lost loved ones, and to praise our emergency services, the firefighters, police officers and paramedics who attended, as well as the staff who played a critical role in evacuating the building. The investigation has yet to start because the building needs to be made safe. But can I ask the First Minister, when the investigation is complete, will she ensure that lessons are learnt, whether that's in practice or if there is indeed a need to enhance building standards regulations?
First Minister.
Can I thank Jackie Bailey for asking this question and raising an issue which is in all of our minds this week. The tragic fire at Cameron House Hotel on the morning of the 19th of December sadly claimed the lives of two young men, and I want today to convey my deepest condolences to the families of the two young men who died and send my thoughts to all of those who were affected by this tragedy. This horrific event demonstrates once again how our firefighters so willingly put themselves in the line of danger to assist others on a daily basis. And I know the whole Chamber will want to send our grateful thanks to our firefighters and to all of our emergency services who responded. Of course, there will be a thorough investigation into what happened at Cameron House, and it is important that that investigation is allowed to run its course. But I can give an assurance today that the Scottish Government, with our partners and indeed with the owners of Cameron House Hotel, will make sure that any lessons that emerge from that investigation are learned and fully applied. But I think for now, Presiding Officer, all of us in this chamber will want to send our thoughts and our condolences to all of those affected by this tragedy.
And I call John Mason.
Thank you for that. I think the First Minister is familiar with the Belgrove Hotel in my constituency, which is allegedly a private hotel, but which is in fact a large homeless, privately run hostel. Can I ask what the Government's response is to reports that there has been an outbreak of Group A strep infections in the Belgrove Hotel?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, I understand that the reported outbreak of necrotitis and fasciitis is inaccurate, but that the prevalence of Group A strep infections is putting residents at risk of that condition, and that in itself is, of course, hugely concerning. I think it is important to remember that the Belgrove is not typical of homeless accommodation in Scotland. However, we are working closely with Glasgow City Council on this issue and on improving the service for some of our most vulnerable people. The recently formed Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Action Group is looking directly at how we can transform services for those that are homeless. We have, of course, also established a £50 million Ending Homelessness Together fund from the start of the next financial year to help us drive change and improvement.
Alison Johnson.
Thank you. Edinburgh's Hogmanay Festival attracts visitors from around the world and is one of the highlights of Scotland's cultural calendar. This year, around 300 unpaid volunteers are being hired as Hogmanay ambassadors for the event, despite these roles being paid in previous years. The Better Than Zero campaign has described the move as using volunteers to displace paid work and have threatened to raise a number of tribunal cases against the organisers over the issue. Does the First Minister agree with me that we must have greater clarity over the role of volunteers at large-scale events and that volunteers should not be recruited as a simple alternative to employing paid staff?
Thank you. First Minister.
Yes, I do agree with that. The delivery of Edinburgh's Hogmanay is a matter for Underbelly, the company that has been contracted to produce the event by the City of Edinburgh Council. I understand that the event will be staffed with 1,700 paid staff. Can I say this about volunteers? And I think it is important. Volunteering is a good thing, and I think all of us across the Chamber would agree with that. Volunteers contribute hugely to festivals and major events. That was the case at Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games. It was the case earlier this year at the Edinburgh Festival. However, those who contribute voluntarily to making these events a success must be treated fairly and they must never be exploited. Volunteers should complement paid professionals to deliver an event and never replace those paid professionals. The value of volunteers should not be used to reduce contract costs. So we expect organisers of major events to work with Volunteer Scotland to ensure that volunteers are treated fairly, and we would also expect organisers to follow the charter that Volunteer Scotland and the STUC put in place to strengthen relationships between volunteers and paid staff. I welcome the fact that all parties in this particular dispute have agreed to get round the table and discuss the matter with Volunteer Scotland. Volunteer Scotland has suspended promotion of the opportunities on its website until the dispute is resolved. So I hope this dispute is resolved quickly and that Edinburgh's Hogmanay is the roaring success that we have come to expect.
And Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. May I also start by offering my condolences to those affected by the tragedy in Cameron House, especially at this time of year. I recently wrote to the Cabinet Secretaries for Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform, and also the Economy, Jobs and Fair Work, regarding two important issues around the Hunterston site in North Ayrshire. One letter was a constructive proposal for economic regeneration of the site and promotion of green energy, and the other on the testing of offshore wind turbines. But more than a month later, I'm yet to receive a response from either. So, in the spirit of the festive season, would the First Minister ask her ministers to double-check their inboxes before clocking off this afternoon?
First Minister.
I hope my ministers are not clocking off this afternoon, would be the first thing I would say. I hope that's not too much of a disappointment to any of them. Of course, I will check the position with the ministers concerned. I'm sure replies to the letters. I'm not aware of the detailed content of the letters, so I'm not able to comment in any more detail, but I'll ensure that replies are winging their way to the member and hopefully they are on his desk in the early part of the new year.
Question number 3, Willie Rennie.
Gordon Edwards was on the BBC this week. Nicola Sturgeon should remember him. I've spoken before about his wait to get mental health treatment. Now he is angry that spending on mental health for young people has fallen in 3 health boards. This is despite Nicola Sturgeon telling him that spending would go up and waiting times would go down. But that wasn't true, was it? A majority of her health boards have failed to meet the basic target. I can tell her that in the last 3 years, over 10,000 young people have had their mental health treatment delayed. Can Nicola Sturgeon answer this question for Gordon? How much longer will young people have to wait before you deliver your mental health promises?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, let me address the issue of spending, because I paid very close attention to the reports earlier this week that came from Freedom of Information requests. And when you look into the detail of that, it is not quite as it appeared in those reports. The data that was reported was not comparing like with like. It, for example, was comparing CAM's expenditure, actual expenditure in 2016-17 against budgeted expenditure in 2017-18. And as members will be aware, that is not, those are not comparable figures, because for a variety of reasons, boards will spend more in year than they originally budget for. So, for example, if you look at one of the boards that was cited in these reports, NHS Lothian, if you examine actual expenditure in this financial year to date, that's April to November, and compare it to the same period last year, there is no reduction. Instead, what you see is that actual NHS Lothian CAMS expenditure has increased by 6%. So I think there is an important point of detail there. I think Willie Rennie may be saying something from a sedentary position. I'm trying to give him a detailed answer to very important questions that he has raised. On the issue of waiting times, the Government and the Health Secretary is very clear. We have more work to do, much more work to do, to reduce waiting times for mental health treatment to levels that I would consider to be the acceptable levels that we want. That is why we are investing record sums of money in mental health. It's why the numbers of staff working in mental health services are increasing. But that work continues until we have no young person that is waiting longer than we would want to have them wait for the mental health treatment that they need.
Willie Rennie.
I'm disappointed with the answer, because her excuses will not hide the government's failings on mental health. Nicola Sturgeon promised things would get better, but they have got worse. Her ministers delayed the mental health strategy. Her ministers delayed millions of pounds of investment. her ministers delayed the suicide prevention plan, and I now discover an important part of the workforce recruitment plan has been delayed by our ministers as well. Delay, 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 whilst young people have to wait, wait and wait. Can Nicola Sturgeon tell us this? Is she proud of her record on mental health?
First Minister.
We will continue to do the work that is required to do to deliver the mental health services that not just young people but everybody across our society has the right to expect. Willie Rennie, I appreciate that he is seeking to make a particular point. Anybody fairly listening to my last answer would not have heard me make excuses. They would have heard me firstly point out some important facts, and I think it is important that the public have facts about these things, but also they would have heard me recognise that we have more work to do. Some of what Willie Rennie has said in that question is a mischaracterisation of reality. Take the mental health. Take the mental health strategy, for example. And Willie Rennie and I have had exchanges about this in the past. It was delayed at the request of the Health Committee of this Parliament because they wanted to have more time to input into that strategy. And it's important on all matters, but I think it's particularly important here that we make sure that we have a strategy that has the support of people working on the front line. We all know the pressures in mental health services. More people are coming forward for treatment because of the reduction in stigma, but that places an even bigger responsibility on our shoulders to make sure that we can meet that demand. That's why we're investing record sums. It's why there are record numbers of people working in mental health, and why we will continue to get on with the work that needs to be done to ensure that we deliver the mental health services that people have the right to expect.